Namaste and welcome to Kaivalya Yoga Gurukulam, KYG as we all know it. Thank you for taking time to attending this class. As always, we consider it a great privilege that you took the time and are willing to be part of this wonderful gathering where we begin to explore, study things that really matter to us, explain to us the source of our existence and a deeper meaning to life. As always, all these studies happen with a mindset that is an approach that is filled with reverence, open-mindedness, and a willingness to explore. And therefore, let us start this class, as always, with 3 Oms. Let us, as we chant these Oms, take our minds to that beautiful temple, the Tillai Nataraja Temple in Chidambaram, where all of this began. Once again, welcome. In today's class, we shall lay the basis, the foundation, having visited that holy shrine in the last class and having performed the parikrama or the pradakshinam of that beautiful temple. We shall lay the foundation or the basis, in other words, explore or understand the meaning of that temple a little more, because that is going to give us an idea of how to approach this topic, what is the depth of this topic, and why is Chidambaram, the Nataraja temple, the dancing Shiva temple, so famous and so vital in the study of yoga. And therefore, please allow me, let me make sure I get my slides correct. All right. So, the beauty of this temple called the Tillai Nataraja, and we'll come to the meaning and all of that in today's class. Like I said, it is not simply understanding something about the temple that is, thousands of miles away from us, but when we begin to know the philosophy behind that temple, the purpose behind the temple, then we begin to appreciate this Akasha principle. The beauty of this temple, as with many Shiva temples, but in this case more so, because in the innermost shrine, in the innermost shrines, if you will, there are many, and I'll explain to you how as we go along in this class. There is the Nataraja, of course, the Tillai Nataraja, the dancing Shiva. However, there is also Mahavishnu. Very little is written about that. Lying down, he is called the Govindaraja Perumal. If you stand facing, you will see the main shrine, pretty close, you can see Nataraja statue, and you turn to the left, you see Perumal there. So it's a very symbolic. I haven't still been able to fully grasp it, so I won't comment too much on it. I'm letting that knowledge sink in, because that was the first time I actually saw Perumal so close to the main shrine in a Shiva temple, and especially in Chidambaram, because Chidambaram is known for Nataraja. You wouldn't think of Govindaraja Perumal also having a very, very big shrine just to the left of you as you face the shrine. But I thought it was worth mentioning. And it is also symbolic that he is not standing, as standing means that he is in full bloom, regulating the universe, but he is lying down. And Shiva is the one dancing. So there is a deeper significance, as opposed to how we understand Shiva as meditating and Vishnu as always standing. But there is also the sleeping Vishnu. So we have to allow those thoughts to sink in. So I'm just starting this class with that, so that you can begin to think, how come there is a Perumal, and that too a Perumal or Mahavishnu lying down? Because Mahavishnu is the one who incarnates in human forms. That is the energy that takes incarnations. Shiva is beyond all of this, right? Shiva doesn't really incarnate, though there are stories for us to understand the symbolism of Shiva. But you don't talk of Shiva and avatars in the oldest sense of the term. So there are Puranas, of course, to help, where our stories are there, which helps us to understand. It's all symbolic in nature. But when it comes to Mahavishnu, the incarnations, then there are human beings and human forms that you can actually point out in history, so to speak. So to find them together and to find that Mahavishnu lying down is a very unique thing in a Shiva temple, and especially one as well known as this one. So it's something to think about. Like I said, I can simply give an intellectual analysis, but I'm not there yet. My heart is not speaking to me about that, but I want you to know that that's a very unique feature of this beautiful temple. In fact, there are people who worship Mahavishnu and make it a pilgrimage there as well. And that was not added much later. It is part of the original manifestation of the temple itself. So that is one thing you may or may not have known about this beautiful temple. All right, before we go into the temple as such, I was debating on how to start this, explain the temple and then come to the basis, or start the basis and then come to the temple, but I think the latter one. So I'm going to explain to you the basic understanding of this Akasha, the three tenets of Akasha, or space as we understand it. Ether, space, all of these are synonyms at this point. The void, if you will, all of this are synonyms at this point. As we say void, because space is not really void, it's not really empty. But when you compare it to air or fire or water or earth, it becomes very subtle. It appears empty, right? If you are looking at a monitor or a phone right now, between you and the phone, between you and a monitor, between you and a television, it seems to be empty space, right? The senses cannot feel or see or do anything. Breath, the senses can at least feel, it cannot see. Fire, it can see, it can feel. Water, it can feel, touch, taste, and so on, and earth as well. But space, the senses can't really see it or touch it, but yet you know there is emptiness in the space, correct? And so that emptiness, I'm saying in a very colloquial manner, in a superficial manner, not in a manner where there'll be depth in that meaning, because it's really not empty. So that space or ether, or if we call that void, if you will, all of that has many layers to it. 3 especially, as per the teachings of Vedanta. That forms the basis of understanding Akasha, understanding space. Okay, what are these 3 types of Akasha? Let's call them the 3 types of Akasha. What are the three types of Akasha? If we understand that, then we'll go into the temple, then we'll understand all the other aspects, and even our scope of the study will come around these three types of Akasha. So it lays the basis. The first one is, the first Akasha is called Bhutakasha. Bhutakasha. Bhuta. Bhuta means Panchabhuta. Bhuta means elements. The 5 elements, which is what these classes are all about until now, correct? Because that is the foundation of any kind of reality. So, Bhuta, the space or the Akasha that is filled with these 5 elements. Bhutakasha, the physical aspect of Akasha. So right now when I said there is space between you and the television, or space between you and a monitor, or space between you and the telephone that you're holding in your hand, that space is Bhutakasha. You know there is space, right? So when somebody comes too close to you and begin to talk, you back out, right? You say, okay, give me some space. Or you have a teenager in your home, says, I want to stay in my room, please knock before coming. I want my space. So that is all Bhutakasha. Bhuta is elements. Bhuta also means past, correct? Bhuta Bhavishya, we call it in Sanskrit. Bhavishya is future, Bhuta is past. Why do you call it also past? Because it's already manifested. It's over. That creation has happened in the past. That means it has become earth. It has already become water. It's already manifested, right? What we are doing is taking these 5 elements and making combinations of that and creating something. We call it discovery or innovations or whatever. But the 5 fundamental elements are already manifested. You can't do anything to them per se. You can manipulate them with some other elements and all of that. But earth is earth. In other words, matter is matter. Correct? And so is water, so is fire, so is air, and so is space. So Bhutakasha is pretty simple to relate to. In fact, all these are some things we have already come across by now. If you're opened and studied, opened your mind and studied the Indian philosophy, none of this will be rocket science or suddenly it's going to be dropping into your lap out of the blue. You will perhaps know this. So there is the Bhutakasha, the 5 elements, correct? And this is the 5th element that we are studying. Then comes the Chittakasha. Chittakasha. Chitta plus Akasha. Just like you had Bhuta plus Akasha. That means a space of about the 5 elements. Now you come to Chitta Akasha. Chitta and Akasha. What is Chitta here? Chitta in this context represents, broadly speaking, the mental plane, the mental space. So there is a mind that we have, and in that mind, whether you call it unconscious mind, conscious mind, subconscious mind, all of that, put all that together, correct? We call it Chitta. Chitta has manas, buddhi, ahankara and all of that, ego, all of that. Oh, ego is also just a thought, correct? So all of that. So they are all in the Chittakasha. The mental space, let's call that the mental space. Because there is really no equivalent word for Chitta in English. So we will, for the ease of understanding, we call it mental space, but it's not simply the mind as we relate to it, but it's subconscious, unconscious mind. It's the substratum which holds the analytical thinking, the logical thinking, the emotions, faith, belief, ego, and of course all the emotions. So all of that forms inside you here and all of that, everything forms Chit Akasha. So when we study Akasha, we will talk about how to clean or how to maintain Bhutakasha. Most of it we have already studied in the other 4 elements, correct? What to eat, what to drink, what to do with the earth element, and because they are all part of the Bhutakasha. So imagine how this one Akasha holds the signs of all that we have already done to a large extent. Then Chittakasha is about the mind and the levels of the mind. Then comes the third one. Bhutakasha, Chittakasha, Chidakasha. You'll find this only in Vedanta. This analysis of Akasha, you will not find it anywhere else in any other Puranas or scriptures. It's pure Vedantic knowledge that has been handed down to us. But since we are talking about the Akasha element, I thought we should start with this so it keeps us focused on these three. Chidakasha. In pronunciation, when you remove Chidakasha, there is really, it's Chittakasha can also be pronounced as Chidakasha, but here we're making it a difference between Chittakasha and Chidakasha. Chidakasha is the space which holds your consciousness. So it's a very different kind of space. That space is infinite. So when we say space is infinite, and we say no, space cannot be infinite, space is also finite, yes. The Bhutakasha space that we think of in terms of expand your mind, think beyond the planet, think beyond the other planets, and think beyond the solar system, we are still in Bhutakasha, Bhutakasha, Bhutakasha. But in Chidakasha, the seat of consciousness has to have a seat, right? That also is contained. That Akasha that contains consciousness is infinite, Chidakasha. So I call it the seat for lack of any other thing. I don't know, I'm not very fond of the word container. Akasha is, we say it contains the universe, but it's actually a seat on which the universe rests, and it projects the universe from itself. So it's like a platform, a seat, a stage, if you will. And we'll come to that when we understand the meaning of the temple. That's what they call it, the stage. Because a container is you pour into it and you pour out of it, it limits your thinking. A seat is, there is freedom to move, but then there is a base on which everything is done, correct? So there is Bhutakasha, Chittakasha and Chidakasha. There are three types of space. So when we address space or when we think of space, we have to think of which is the space I'm clearing. So here's the beauty. I want you to think about this. Here is the beauty of many of these great writers who were in our times, like Mahatma Gandhi, maybe even Lokmanya Tilak and all of these, from India I'm talking about. Their internal Chittakasha, the mental space, and perhaps they were able to touch into the Chidakasha. We don't know that, right? That's a personal thing. But that was so large that even though they were confined to prison walls because of political struggle, they began writing, raising a human consciousness about talking about inner freedom, outer freedom, and so on and so forth. They were great philosophers, correct? So even though they were put into prison because they brought something new. Anytime you think of something new, you're always first chastised. So they were in prison, but that Bhutakasha, even though seemed stifling, that Chittakasha and that Chidakasha must have been so vast that they didn't allow that Bhutakasha, the little prison walls, to stop them from writing, to stop them from expressing those grand thoughts. Right? I spent many weeks from early morning till night in the presence of my beloved Guru, Bhagavan Sri Satya Sai Baba. His rooms were very tiny, just 10 feet by 12 feet, or that was his living room size, and maybe 9 by 10, that was his bedroom size, just stuck to each other, like just one room into the other, and that was his access, that was his space that he had, that we called a private quarters, that his living quarters, correct? And that's where he lived from 1965 or 70 on till 2000 or so. And so that space is so tiny that you will feel stifled. You will feel, oh my gosh, I need a break. I need to go out. I need to take a fresh air. Why do we get that? Because we have confined ourselves into understanding that somehow we are limited to 5 elements. And therefore, if Bhutakasha is very small, let's say we live in a small home, or God forbid in a small room, or what about a cave, just stuck in a cave in the mountains? Would you feel stifled? And if you do, then we need to ask ourselves, why am I limiting myself to just this one level of space? There is a space inside me, my mind, that can go beyond this. That's why mind, today even science is beginning to understand, the psychological part of science, that mind is non-local. It doesn't really, it's not confined to your body. I can think of a place and I'm actually there with my mind. I can travel. So suddenly my Chittakasha takes me out of the bounds of Bhutakasha. And then when you touch the spirit, we get those moments, the aha moments, the peak moments where something clicks and we get lost. Then there is that infinite space. We experience that in many levels. One way to one of our everyday experiences where we can talk of Chidakasha is, which is beyond the mind, is deep sleep state. But we don't experience it, right? We get up and assume that must be a good time because we have rested well and so on. We feel rested, we feel fresh, so we say we have slept well. So there's an assumption that we make, but at that moment when we are deep asleep, we don't exist. But that is a taste of the Chidakasha. So you could be sleeping on a tiny bed, but once you fall asleep, it doesn't matter if the bed is tiny, if the room is tiny, if the home is tiny, or whether you are living in a mansion, or you're sleeping on a king-size bed, or California king-size bed. They have all kinds of sizes here. So it doesn't matter, because in Chidakasha, you are completely gone beyond even the mind. And thus now you can understand how the saints and the yogis lived in small caves. Why aren't they after big mansions and big cars and big things? Because it really doesn't matter. Big and small, we talk in terms of Bhutakasha only. You could have the biggest mansion on the earth, but if your Chittakasha is small, then you won't be able to enjoy it. That's why we live in a big home and we are afraid of security, we are afraid of who's coming, who's going, do I have the doors been locked, and what is this? We still are in that stage of fear, not only about the home, but generally in case. It doesn't mean you suddenly become broad-minded and giving and loving, correct? Because the Bhutakasha may be big, but the Chittakasha is small. Then the Chidakasha might be even smaller, may not even be explored. So, Bhutakasha, big, small, all of that really doesn't matter as long as the Chittakasha begins to open up. And then when you touch the Chidakasha, you'll realize there was really no limit to me. And the space is actually completely infinite, if you will. That's the only way to explain. So that is how we approach this concept of space. See how deep it is. So please think on these lines, and let us proceed now with the temple and how this temple gives us an idea of these things, and we'll explore this further in many classes. All right. So we come to the name of the city in which this temple is located. The temple was not built after the name has emerged based on the temples. That is how it was. The portal was discovered, and the portal was built, a temple was built, and around that slowly the kings over hundreds of years, they built a kingdom and so on and so forth, and then that place got a name. There are many names to this city, but the one that is popular, the one that we all know, the one that is really stuck as the symbolic name for this place is Chidambaram. So you see, now we talked of Chit and Chittakasha, Chidakasha. Now you're coming to Chidambaram. So that is the name that immediately implies the essence of the temple. So the city name is Chidambaram. What does that mean? Chidambaram, Chidakasha plus Ambaram is Chidambaram. Chidakasha. So I took the Chid from there and Ambaram, Chidambaram. Chit and Ambaram is Chidambaram. So here you might say it is Chit and Ambaram. So can it be the Chittakasha and not the Chidakasha? So in this case, they combined the Chitta. That's why I said that is Vedanta. This name has come combining the Chidakasha and the Ambaram. So it became Chidambaram. Okay. So what is Ambaram? Ambaram means sky. Ambaram means sky. So Chidakasha is consciousness, which is as vast as the sky. See, the only way I can relate is with synonyms, with metaphors, with similes or analogies, correct? So when we say infinite, you look around and say, what is infinite? Space, the way we understand it, even in Bhutakasha, even though technically and intellectually we know it's finite, but as far as your eyes can see, you see it just expanding, correct? So the sky becomes a symbolic representation of that consciousness which is vast in its expansion, the quality. So Chidambaram, consciousness that is as vast as the sky, that's how it is called. Ambaram becomes, Ambaram is also in Sanskrit used for clothes. Clothing is Ambaram. So Shiva has got another name called Dikambaram. Dikambaram. He wears the directions as his clothes. So what does that even mean, correct? That shows the infinite nature of that formless aspect of Shiva. So if east and west and north and south are the directions, and if those directions are his clothes, then who is he? How vast is he, correct? Because where does east begin? Where does east end? Where does west begin? Where does it end? And so on. So he is also known as Digambaram. Ambaram means clothes. There he who adorns directions as his clothes. Now popularly as it was practiced later on, Digambaram means one who does not wear clothes as well. Because he is naked, because he feels I'm no longer limited to my body. So there are monks in India, a particular sect of Shiva is called the Agora Sadhus, and there are others too. They won't wear clothes. They keep their body bare because they believe that they have identified themselves with that consciousness of Shiva, or they are on the way to identify and they feel that is a path. So they feel the whole world is my clothes, the whole universe is my clothing. So I don't need another clothing. So I don't want to be limited to this idea that I am the body and somehow I have to protect it. That's a very advanced and a very powerful approach, right? Very strong approach. But Ambaram comes from there. Digambaram also means naked. Digambaram is one who doesn't wear clothes. Why? Because the direction is his clothes. Sky is his clothing. He covers himself with the sky. But Digambaram also means one who is so vast that the sky is the one that covers him. The concept of Shiva is extremely powerful and extremely beautiful. Even contemplating on those thoughts take you into a meditative mood. And then you just sit quietly thinking of that vastness. That's the beauty of that. So Chidakasha and Ambaram became Chidambaram. There is other two Tamil versions. Tamil is another language like Sanskrit, and Tamil is the oldest language, considered even older than Sanskrit. That is debatable, so I'm not getting into that debate. I believe Tamil is older, but that's how it is. It's just a matter of belief at this point based on you read. There's enough matter to read if any of you are interested, which is an older language. But at this point, it really doesn't matter. So these both are very ancient languages. In Tamil language also, which is where this temple is built in South India, in Tamil Nadu, and the yogic scripture that I mentioned to you in the last video, and we'll touch upon it. Tirumandiram, written by Tirumular, a great yogi, is written in Tamil. And it's even more difficult than Sanskrit. The meanings, they're so beautifully written and so poetically done. Anyway, so in Tamil there is a word called Ambalam. Ambalam here means a stage, a platform. In Tamil, Chit is consciousness. So in Tamil they don't, that's why I said Vedanta. Vedanta is Sanskrit earlier. In Tamil, Chit or Chidakasha, Chittakasha, Chittambalam, Chidambalam, all that is the same. Chit and Chida. Chitta and Chida is same. In Sanskrit, only in Vedanta, when it comes to Akasha, they have made difference between Chittakasha and Chidakasha. But in Tamil, Chittambalam becomes Chidambalam. Chidambalam becomes Chidambaram. In Tamil, lam and ram can be interchanged in certain contexts, and therefore Chitambalam became Chidambaram, etymologically, if you trace it back. Ambalam here is the stage. It's important to understand, because there's a dancing Shiva. He's dancing, he needs a platform, right? Like a performer. The universe to be presented needs to have a container. The Atma to even exist needs a container. There has to be a cause. So Chidambaram becomes that cause, the stage which holds at all levels. So it contains all the other akashas as well. So that is another name for this temple, this city. The second way of coming to this name, which is also in Tamil, is Chittu and Ambalam. Chittu and Ambalam. So here the word Chitta, the first one, Chitta, is consciousness. Here the other word Chittu is the dancing gods. Chittu means dancing gods, a dance that they perform. And they need a stage to perform. And therefore, Chittu and Ambalam became Chitrambalam, Tiruchitrambalam, and that became Chidambaram. So if you go there, they will say Tiruchitrambalam. Just like you and I say Sai Ram, or we say Sitaram, or Hail Mary, or whatever it is that we say to greet each other. In Tamil, they will say Tiruchitrambalam. Tiruchitrambalam means may your consciousness be the dancing god and exhibit that dance, that primordial dance on that stage. So it takes you directly to the very source of the highest self. But that Chittu and Ambalam, which normally in Tamil they say Chitrambalam or Tiruchitrambalam. Tiru means, like we say Shri in Sanskrit, or in Hindi we say Shri and Srimati. In Tamil they say Tiru. Tiru means holy. So Tiruchitrambalam, the holiest of holy places. That became Chitrambalam, became Chidambaram. Okay, Chittambalam became Chitrambalam, Chitrambalam became Chidambaram. So again etymologically. But for those of you from Tamil Nadu or even otherwise, it's pretty interesting to note that all of these names have a deeper meaning, and that meaning simply all comes to the same thing. It means the highest consciousness is the stage where we begin to project our Atma from. We experience the seat of the highest consciousness, if you will. Chidambaram. That is the name of the city. All right. Then we come to another one that's called the Tillai. The temple is called Tillai Nataraja Kovil. Kovil means temple. So Tillai Nataraja. Let's understand Tillai and Nataraja first. What does this Tillai mean? There must be some meaning, correct? So it's very interesting, and we'll try and draw some correlations between the picture that you see above me there, the tree there. That's not a banyan tree. That kind of looks like a banyan tree that we studied in Dakshinamurti classes. This tree is a grove, a kind of mangrove. It's called the milky mangrove because the leaves of this tree, if you break them, some kind of milk oozes out. Okay, and it's used for medicinal purposes and so on. So I put the botanical name here for your perusal. You can note it down and explore further on this. This is not a single tree. I mean, it could be contained as a single tree, just like a banyan tree can be contained as a single tree, but let alone the banyan tree becomes a forest, correct? Because the tree branches become the roots and it just gets continually, almost one tree can go into many acres. Kind of very similarly, this is also a thick ecosystem where the roots get entangled and then other trees come up and they all entangle themselves with the other. And you see in this picture on top of my frame there, you'll see the roots are seen over the ground as well. So there are roots above the ground, under the ground, and there are many levels of ecosystems it maintains. It is part of what is called the wetlands. And there is salt water, there is river water, it's all mixed. So there is different forms of life that is maintained in this very unique primordial kind of growth. It is very difficult to penetrate and go within. So there is a place within a few kilometers from Chidambaram, from this temple, that has these groves or trees, if you will. So that tree is called the Tillai tree or the mangrove, the nature of that. Just like you call the banyan tree, you call this the Tillai tree. And so this is in a place called the Pichavaram. Pichavaram, you can Google that and you will notice that you read about it. It says it is the second largest wetland in the world. However, it was much, much larger than what it exists today. It's a wetland, it's an ecosystem inside. There is a whole universe there with different forms of life. In fact, there were, at the time at which the Chidambaram temple was discovered, and people were used to go to those temples, and there was a Shivlingam discovered in the middle of that. That is what the temple is today, but it's all covered by city. Tigers were known, so it is also called the Vyagrapura, Vyagra Agraha, and there are many names for that. There is a yogi who transformed himself into, who had tiger claws. So Vyagrapada was a yogi who was there, and there are so many stories like that, along with Patanjali, and so on, who meditated in these forests and worshipped the lingam. And that lingam is separate from the main lingam. That is the lingam with Patanjali worship, which I said, where I had the privilege and the honor of getting the Kaivalya lingam placed there and did the Abhishekam and got it blessed. So that is the Patanjali's lingam. That is also was part of this mangrove. And so they were all divinely guided there into this huge acres, hundreds and hundreds of acres of this forest was there. And therefore that resembled universe in itself, because there were so many types of life forms there, right from the microscopic life forms to larger animals to humans and all of that, birds, and the whole ecosystem was there. So that ecosystem, thick undergrowth, if you will, not cultivated but naturally there, represents the mind, the spirit, and the universe in itself, how entangled we are. Again, it is a very great reminder for all of us that however old these teachings are, they all kind of have the same essence. And one of the essence that always touches me is we are not separate. If I hurt somebody else, I'm actually hurting myself. Because this shows us that we are all entangled, we are all connected, not only with the environment and the universe, but with each other. So if you and I are thinking of this and raising a consciousness to these ideas, somewhere else, somebody else who needs that inspiration is somehow mysteriously drawing that inspiration and knowledge at some point, some place. I truly believe in this. It's not magic. It may seem like that for those of us who are confined to the Bhutakasha. But if you think of the Chittakasha and the Chidakasha, then why not? Because the teachings have always been this. We are all interconnected. We are all interconnected. One soul evolves. Everyone who comes in contact with that person, he or she, really all of that doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Ethnicity, culture, language, nothing matters. There is a spark. And that soul also feels the upliftment. I so believe in it. Just a couple of days ago, we got a very beautiful note from somebody in Ukraine. These two sisters said, we don't know half the time what you're speaking, but we love it. We watch it, we sleep with it, we eat with it. We are just so connected by what you're saying. Thank you so much for helping us out in this time, in this difficult time of war. So how is that happening, correct? That is because at some level we are reaching out into the hearts, minds and emotions, because that is us. It is us that we see. It's not simply empathy. Empathy is an expression of that interconnectedness, and therefore this ecosystem is an example and sets the base for us to understand why are we even learning all these, because ultimately we want to experience that interconnectedness. And that is why it is said, when you see a bad man, examine your heart. When you see a good man, emulate him, because these are all reflections of our own self. Right? Anyway, I thought I had to share that thought, because that is the basis of this reality. We are not separate. Nothing is separate in this universe. Everything is an expression of the one consciousness. And therefore we are all interconnected. We are actually one. But if that's too difficult to comprehend, at least let us understand and make peace with the idea that we are interconnected. Tillai. So that's where the name Tillai came. So if you want to get an idea on the Google map, you'll see, let me take myself out of the screen. So there you see the Pichavaram mangrove forest, right by the sea, closer to the sea, and the temple where you see the red location mark, that's the main temple. So it's about a 24-minute drive, they say. It could probably take an hour or two today, or maybe more, 3 hours if you decide to walk 13, 14 kilometers, 15 kilometers. But imagine those days. Let's go to the next one. It's kind of an enlarged thing. Imagine those days, none of this existed. All this was part of that mangrove. So you have a river above the blue line that shows the highway connecting these two. And then you have little rivers that flow into that Pichavaram mangrove at this point. The sea is close by, so there's a lot of saltwater backup that would happen through those river inlets. So the Pichavaram mangrove forest in those days was that Tillai trees, that entire place was surrounded. And so today it seems very far and very distant. You might say, oh, there are no trees here, that's 15 kilometers away. But think of 2,000-3,000 years ago, or 5,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago. That's when all of this is been there, correct? So it's fascinating to see how big that mangrove must have been. And today, because of development, we have destroyed most of it. So it does have environmental impact and all of that. But I won't go into that section. But I thought just to give you an idea of how these names came up. It's very interesting. So you had Tillai. That's why it's Tillai Nataraja. Okay? Like in earth element, you have Ekambareshwar from the mango leaf and so on. So everything that's connected, there is a connection with the tree. Every Shiva temple in India has a tree that is associated with that temple. In fact, the name of Shiva is associated with that tree. Like Jambukeshwar. Okay? Like that. There are. It's very fascinating. It's a very unique way of connecting the tree to the temple. That's how deeply connected we are to the environment. All right. Then comes Nataraja. You see this beautiful picture above my frame. You see the dancing Shiva. So that is the symbolism of Nataraja. What does Nataraja mean? Nata comes from Natyam. Natyam is dance. Raja means king. So Nataraja means king of dancers. The one who introduced dance, you could say. The one who knew all dances, maybe. So that's a kind of the king of all dancers. There's no one better than him, if you will. So Nataraja, that is where the names come from. The name Nataraja comes from. So there's a very interesting story, of course, in the Shiva Purana, in the Puranas, and in the way they wanted to introduce this concept of Nataraja. None of them are devoid of deep meaning. It's all up to us to explore this and understand it. But the story goes like this. In that Pichavaram, in those days it was not Pichavaram, it's called Tillai. So in that Tillai Vanam, Vanam means forest. In that Tillai Vanam, that huge forest and mangrove, a group of rishis or sages, way beyond. This is even before this temple was discovered, right? That portal was discovered. So they were doing their penance, and they wanted to now explore deeper aspects of this idea of mantras and rituals, because they began to realize, as the story goes, and I'm being a little free in explaining that story so it stays with us. They began to realize that we could, through the use of our chants and combination of sounds, we can actually control all the elements and manifest whatever we want in our lives. So let's go and study this even further and become even more powerful. So they didn't want to be disturbed. So they went and they didn't want to share this with anyone, their practices. They didn't want anyone to spy on them and learn. And so they went deep into the mangroves, in this Tillai Vanam, where there were tigers and all of that. But they went and set up some kind of settlement, and they were practicing their mantras, very proud that, hey, listen, I'm calling upon the sun god and the rain god, and they all obey us. And so we are kind of very powerful. There's really no power beyond us. Of course, there is symbolism, right? We all feel, once I have the money, I'm all powerful. So we are in the Bhutakasha. If I get a big home, a big car, and everything big, then I feel I'm all powerful. But that is just the Bhutakasha. There is a Chittakasha and the Chidakasha. But this is that kind of understanding. So in that space, they were very proud, and therefore there was this one mendicant. One mendicant walks into the grove and listens to them. And he says, oh, it's time to teach them a lesson. And that is none other than the Shiva himself, as the story goes. So he says, it's time for me to teach them a lesson. So he walks into the grove, right into their hermitage. They are all performing their rituals and sacrifices in one place. And he walks straight up to their homes where their wives are. And he says, can you give me alms? I'm a beggar. I want alms. And the wives come out to give alms. They are first of all shocked that somebody else could even walk through that dense forest, which is laden with tigers and all wild animals. And of course, it's almost impossible to find the way in. And number one. Number two, they were shocked at how handsome this mendicant was. So they come out to give the alms, and they see him, and they just stand enthralled by his beauty, by his masculinity, by his charm, by his amazing presence. They're just struck. And then the neighbor's wife comes, and she's also like that. And all the wives just are completely enthralled by this, bewitched, if you will, by his presence, this presence of this mendicant. And the rishis notice that, and they come rushing, and they say, what is this? What nonsense is this? How dare this person even find our place? And the mendicant tells him, you think you are the most powerful, you are not. And they say, how dare you even listen to our conversations, you're spying on us, and so on. And so the first thing they say is, you don't know who we are very powerful. And so they chant the very powerful mantras, and they materialize wild snakes and fling it on him. And when they fling it on him, he moves his hands, grabs the snakes, and one becomes his wristband, one becomes his armband, one goes around his neck, and it begins to adorn, the snakes begin to adorn his body, and he starts moving. They are shocked. They're like, my gosh, what was that? He should have been dead by now, correct? And then the rishis get together and say, no, this is some other magician. We haven't met him, so let us increase our powers. So then they manifest a wild tiger and they rush it on him. And the tiger comes charging, and huge dust is raised, and the mendicant begins to dance around the tiger and grab the tiger, and there seems to be a tussle. For a few moments there is so much dust, they don't see what it is, and then when the dust disappears, they see this mendicant, and he is now wearing the tiger skin as a robe around his body, covering his body. And they are absolutely shocked. And finally they muster all their powers and create a demon. The demon's name is Muyalagan. So they get that demon, and they send that demon to fight this mendicant. And the moment the mendicant sees the demon, instead of fighting, he begins dancing. He begins dancing. He picks the leaves of the Tillai mangrove, ties it as a crown around his head, and he begins dancing as if in ecstasy. And then his hair becomes loose, and his two more arms come out. One is holding the fire, one is holding Damaru, and he begins dancing, and he begins to in that dance, the demon can't catch him. He falls down, and Shiva stamps him with his right leg, and he lifts his left leg up, and he takes this pose that you see. So if you see that picture now, sorry, If you see that picture now, you see the Rakshasa or the demon lying on his feet, and his right foot is on top and the left foot is up. He has 4 hands. One hand is blessing, one right hand is blessing, the other right hand is holding what is called the Damaru. Left hand, one is down in a dance pose like so, because the right hand is up like this, and the other left hand holds fire. And then the rishis realize that this is not ordinary mendicant. And then they beautifully compose a poem. You are the one who has mastered all. You are the lord of the elements. You are the lord of everything. So from you comes everything. And then they call him the Nataraja, the king of dancers. So that is the story of Nataraja. And all of this happens in the Tillai Vanam. So he's called Tillai Nataraja. Right? Later on, Patanjali hears about this dance. Adishesha, who wants to come and see the dance, the great snake from the Patala dimension, he says, I want to see the snake. A dance of Krishna, I'm sorry, I'm saying Krishna, Jesus, all these names come. So Shiva says, come to the Vanam, come to the Tillai Vanam. And there they see the dance. So that's the story. So what I want to do is talk about this, the symbolism, the way I understand this. Snakes are below the earth. It's very earth-oriented, correct? They don't fly, they don't do anything. They're just earth-oriented. They slither, and they are the connection to the earth. So to me, when I read this story, the symbolism of it appears that they're telling us that the first space that Shiva handles and helps you conquer is the Bhutakasha, snakes. Think of snakes, you don't look up for snakes, right? You only look into the ground, at the ground for snakes. So ground means Bhuta. And therefore in this physical space of ours, which is a bit like snakes. And so Bhutakasha. Then the tiger is like the mind with emotions, a raging tiger, if you will, the mind that is caught up with desires and anger and all of that. All of that is aspects of our mind that keeps us engaged in the other plane. So that is the Chittakasha. That also Shiva just wears as his robe. It also adorns him. So all of these are adornment for Shiva. None of them are killed, none of them are, it's all transformed, and he wears them, right? He doesn't kill them and throw them away. That's not the symbolism of the story. Is snakes adorn him. The tiger disappears, the tiger skin adorns him. Right? And the Muyalagan is Muyal, it's a Tamil name, Muyalagan. In Sanskrit it became Apasmara, which is also under Dakshinamurti. That's also another aspect of Shiva, a different approach of Shiva, where Shiva is very still. Here he is dancing. But whether he is still or whether he is dancing, under his foot, one foot, the right foot, under his right foot, there is this demon. In Tamil, because Nataraja is this whole concept was developed in this part, the name of that demon or Asura is Muyalagan. Dakshinamurti is from the north. He's sitting in the north there. So there it's Sanskrit, Apasmara. That concept is the same. So here, Muyal means hair, rabbit hair. Muyal, soft, gentle. Why would a demon be called Muyalagan? Because he was a demon, but he got that name because he surrendered to Shiva. When he became soft as a hair, gentle as a hair, Shiva put his foot on top. So for Shiva to rise in our consciousness, for the Nataraja to express himself to us, we have to become like a muyal, like a hare, like a rabbit, gentle, soft, timid, right? That Muyalagan, then he will stamp on you and you need him to stamp. If he doesn't stamp here, us, and put us down, then we will get caught in this Bhutakasha and maybe Chittakasha. How do you explain Chidakasha? And then realize, my God, all of this is just him. The Bhutakasha is merely snakes adorning him. The Chittakasha is the tiger, skin around him. And the Chidakasha is that he is dancing now with the Muyalagan completely submerged. So that it represents our ego, our false identities, all our limitations. They're all demonic in nature, correct? It prevents us to see who we are, distracts us from our source, and therefore that energy is subdued completely. Once you're under Shiva's foot, there is no way you're going to come back again. Completely subdued. And Shiva does what kind of dance? Ananda Tandavam. Ananda. In bliss he is dancing. In joy he is dancing. So the true joy of the higher self is expressed when the little self is completely subdued. If that it is not subdued, then there is a fight between the Shiva consciousness and the Moyalagan. So the demon comes up and Shiva wages a war, and then finally Shiva subdues him and begins to dance Ananda Tandava. There are other Puranic stories where Shiva is angry, Kali is angry, they dance anger. There is a Tandavam which is also angry dance, but that's a different context. In this context, in Tillai Nataraja Temple, the very first aspect of Shiva introduced as a dancer, it was introduced as the Ananda Tandav, the dance of bliss. It is just bliss. In that space, in the Chidakasha, the final seat of consciousness, there is nothing but just bliss. Bliss is Ananda. Ananda and bliss, though bliss may have an antonym, Ananda really doesn't have an antonym. There is really no opposite. Sukha has antonym Dukkha. Ananda has really no antonym because it means bliss. A state beyond happiness and sorrow, beyond all that. It just has existence with no conditions, no strings attached, if you will. So, I want to end this class with describing his hands. So, on one hand, he is holding, let's go to the right hand, on top right hand, it may not be very clear here, but he is holding a damaru. Damaru is a drum. I wish I had got it. I thought I wanted to bring it and I forgot I have that. But you know what, you might have probably know what damaru is. It's a vibrating sound. It means spanda, it means vibrations. So creation comes when Shiva begins to vibrate the sound patterns. There is a vibration happens. So the beauty is all sound owe their origin to vibrations, and from there is a source vibration which begins to release waves of energy that begins to finally manifest into matter and so on. So creation begins with his right hand. When he plays Damaru, creation happens. On the left hand, fire. Fire symbolizes the end, because fire has the energy to engulf everything and transform everything into ashes. So fire symbolizes the end. So the beginning on one side, the end on one side, he does the dance. He is the one who controls the beginning and the end. So he has fire and he has Damaru. What a beautiful concept. And they're introducing that concept as a dance. So the same thing is also introduced in Dakshinamurti, where he is still, but he still has all these. So understand that ultimately we will realize moving and stillness is all only in our Bhutakasha. In Chidakasha, there is no difference between moving, there is no difference between stillness and moving. Both are the same. There is no difference. There is no difference between Shiva and Shakti. There is no difference at all, because there is only one. And in that one lies everything is part of that. So anyway, then the right hand, the two normal hands, one is taking the dancer's pose, one rests his hand and he continues to bless. That means eternal blessing, because his hand is rested, it will be there for a long time. The beauty with his feet are the right foot is pressing the demon, not the left. The right foot is pressing. The right is the Pingala side. The right is the one that is extrovert. The right is where we act. So in action, we have to show. The higher self has to act. In other words, it has to be an experience where the ego is subdued. We can be philosophers, we can be thinkers, we can be scholars. But if we don't act on it, there is really the dance of Shiva won't happen. So when he dances, he actually creates a reality. In reality, you will be subdued and your higher self will actually begin to dance. So what is that higher self? Is represented by the left leg. The left leg lifting up shows the leg is now come away from all the limitations of Bhutakasha. The leg comes up. In other words, the spirit is completely free from being tied to the ground. A very beautiful, and there are many, many ways to interpret this. I'm just giving you an idea so you can develop your own thinking. is hair flying, and then there is that circle of light with all fires around him, and all of that represents so many universes that manifest in that dance. It explodes from that center of the dance. That center simply exhibits the joy of creating and dissolution, but in that process so many universes come. So that big circle around him is part of Nataraja. Traditional Nataraja is with that circle, otherwise it's an incomplete Nataraja. We have dancing Shivas, and there are artistic ways to do that, but the concept of Nataraja has to have that circle, because that explains how multiple universes at all different dimensions begin to emerge from that single vibrations of the Damaru. A very, very beautiful concept, one of my most favorite ideas, because I can connect to it emotionally, I can connect to it artistically, it helps me visualize, and in that connection I'm able to, for me, and I'm sure you probably do, please let me know your thoughts, but you're able to kind of touch and get an idea of what is this, the beauty of that. That idea of fear of death and all of that begins to vanish, because ultimately I am that Shiva. I'm just the fire on. Now it's time to go into the fire, and once again the Damaru will come and the dance will happen, and let's just enjoy the dance. And millions of birth and death through this is part of that. That knowledge as an experience, because his right foot is down. If that knowledge comes truly as an experience, then you and I will experience the higher dance of the higher self. So much so for this class, and we will explore the insides of the temple a little more in the next class, and let Shiva guide us. This is one of the highest forms of learning, and I'm so grateful that I'm able to vocalize these thoughts in a manner that I feel comfortable, in a language that we can all relate to, and hopefully you find these classes useful. Thank you as always for your patience and for listening. Let's end this class with 1 Om and 3 Shantis. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.